The P-8 Poseidon had been on station for 4 hours and 11 minutes when the intercept began. She was flying a standard maritime patrol track over the South China Sea, in international airspace above waters that the relevant legal frameworks defined as open to overflight by any nation's military aircraft. Conducting the kind of intelligence collection and surface surveillance mission that the United States Navy had been conducting over this body of water for decades, without interruption and without apology. The crew of 9 had been working their sensors since departure, building the picture of surface and subsurface activity in the patrol area that was the mission's primary product. They knew their legal position. They knew their operational environment. They had flown this track before, and they would fly it again. And the fact that they would fly it again was itself a statement about the nature of what they were doing and why they were doing it. The South China Sea is international water. The airspace above it is international airspace. The P-8 was there because it had every right to be there, and because being there produced information that the Navy needed. The 2 J-16 fighters had been tracked by the E-2D Hawkeye, operating at altitude 60 miles to the east, since they launched from a Chinese military airfield on Hainan Island at 7:43 a.m. The E-2D crew had watched them climb, turn southeast, and assume a heading consistent with an intercept approach toward the P-8's patrol track. The intercept approach was not a surprise. Chinese military aircraft had been conducting intercepts of American maritime patrol aircraft in this airspace for years, with a frequency and an aggressiveness that had fluctuated in ways that correlated with political and operational conditions the intelligence community monitored continuously. The E-2D crew had flagged the J-16s heading to the P-8 crew at 7:49 a.m., giving the maritime patrol aircraft 6 minutes of warning before the fighters reached a position that would place them in direct proximity to the P-8's track. What the E-2D crew had not yet known at 7:49 a.m. was that these 2 J-16s were not flying a standard intercept profile. The standard profile that Chinese military aircraft used when intercepting American maritime patrol flights in this airspace had been well characterized over years of collection. The standard profile involved approaching the target aircraft from behind and to one side, establishing a parallel track at a distance that ranged from professionally distant to deliberately uncomfortable, depending on the political temperature of the specific week, and maintaining that parallel track for a period intended to communicate surveillance and presence before breaking off. Inconvenient. Unprofessional on the more aggressive occasions. But within a range of behavior that the crews on both sides had, through long familiarity, developed a working operational relationship with. The profile the J-16s were flying at 7:55 a.m. was not the standard profile. Their approach geometry was head-on, not offset, not from behind. Head-on, slightly below the P-8's altitude, on a closure rate that the E-2D's radar was resolving as higher than any previous intercept in the collection record for this airspace. The E-2D's radar officer transmitted the updated contact picture to the P-8 crew, the USS Theodore Roosevelt's CIC, and the strike group's coordination node simultaneously. The transmission included the geometry, the closure rate, and a 3-word assessment from the radar officer that was not standard report language, but that conveyed the specific character of what he was seeing with an efficiency that standard report language could not have matched. The 3 words were, "This is different." The P-8's mission commander had been listening to the E-2D's track updates since 7:49 a.m. When the updated geometry reached him at 7:55 a.m., he had already begun the mental calculation that the geometry required. A head-on intercept by two fighter aircraft at high closure rate in international airspace was not, in and of itself, a prohibited act. It was a hostile act in the specific meaning of the word hostile that professional aviators use when they describe behavior that is deliberately dangerous without being technically illegal. Hostile in that sense. The P-8's crew had a set of immediate action options available to them. The mission commander considered them in the 4 seconds between receiving the E-2D's transmission and making his first move. He broke left. Not sharply, not evasively in the sense of a panic maneuver. A deliberate course change of 40 degrees left, combined with a descent of 2,000 feet, that took the P-8 out of the exact intercept geometry the J-16s were flying toward while maintaining the patrol area and demonstrating, through the precision of the maneuver, that the change was a considered response rather than a startled reaction. The course change also served a collection purpose that the mission commander had noted when he calculated it. The new geometry placed the P-8's sensor package in a slightly better orientation relative to the J-16s for the electromagnetic collection that the mission's secondary tasking required. A deliberate response that also improved the collection picture. Two purposes from one maneuver. The mission commander had been flying these missions for 7 years. The J-16s adjusted. They had been watching the P-8 on their own systems and they had seen the course change, and they had compensated for it with an adjustment that brought them back onto an approach geometry that converged with the P-8's new track. The adjustment was immediate and precise. These were not pilots who had miscalculated and were correcting an error. These were pilots who had anticipated a response and had planned for it. The E-2D's radar officer updated the contact picture and transmitted. The update reached the Theodore Roosevelt's CIC at 7:57 a.m. The admiral commanding the strike group had been in the CIC since 7:53 a.m. when the E-2D's initial assessment had reached him. He had been watching the developing picture with the particular focused attention that a situation that has not yet crossed any legal threshold but is moving toward one produces in a commander who understands both the threshold and the consequences of crossing it in either direction. At 7:58 a.m., the lead J-16 made its first direct pass at the P-8. The pass placed the fighter at a distance from the P-8's wing that the P-8 crew's visual estimate reported immediately to the E-2D, put at less than 100 feet. Less than 100 feet at a closure speed and a relative geometry that produced a wake turbulence event that the P-8's pilots felt through the controls as a brief but definite departure from stable flight before the flight control computers corrected. 100 feet. At the speeds and altitudes involved, 100 feet was an operational margin that no professional aviator would choose in peacetime airspace between friendly aircraft. Between a Chinese fighter and an American maritime patrol aircraft over the South China Sea, it was a deliberate communication delivered in the language of physics rather than radio transmission. The mission commander reported the pass to the E-2D and to the Theodore Roosevelt's CIC in the language that incident reports use, and then returned his attention to the aircraft around him. The second, J-16, had not yet made its pass. It was holding a position behind and above the P-8. At a distance the E-2D was resolving as approximately half a mile, which was close enough that the P-8 crew could see it visually without instruments. The second fighter was waiting. Its position relative to the P-8 blocked the P-8's optimal egress route toward the east, the direction that would have taken the maritime patrol aircraft back toward the Theodore Roosevelt's operating area most directly. The positioning was not incidental. Both fighters, one that had just made the close pass and one holding the eastern approach, had been positioned to communicate the same message from two different vectors. This airspace, which was legally international, was being treated by these two aircraft and the authority behind them as subject to conditions that the international legal framework did not recognize. The admiral made a decision at 7:59 a.m. The decision was authorized under the rules of engagement applicable to this operational area and this category of incident. It involved assets already airborne. The EA-18G Growler that had been conducting its own collection mission at altitude 60 miles south of the P-8's position had been monitoring the J-16 intercept since the E-2D's first transmission and had already been repositioning toward the P-8's area on a heading that the Growler's mission commander had initiated without waiting for direction, because the heading was obviously correct. Given the developing picture, and waiting for direction to take an obviously correct heading was not how experienced Growler crews operated. The Growler was 40 miles from the P-8's position at 7:59 a.m. and closing at cruise speed. The Theodore Roosevelt's deck had been preparing a response package since 7:53 a.m. Two A-18F Super Hornets had been brought from their ready alert status to a 5-minute launch readiness at 7:54 a.m. A readiness state that meant their crews were in the aircraft with engines running and the aircraft were positioned at the catapults awaiting a launch order. The crews had been briefed on the developing situation through the aircraft's communications system as they sat at the catapults. They knew what was happening 70 miles to their west. They were ready to go as soon as the order arrived. The order arrived at 8:01 a.m. Both F/A-18Fs launched within 90 seconds of each other, their catapult shots carrying them off the Roosevelt's bow into the South China Sea's morning sky, where they climbed to their assigned altitude and turned west toward the P-8's position at the speed the intercept geometry required. Transit time to the P-8's area, 11 minutes at current speed. In those 11 minutes, the situation around the P-8 developed further. The second, J-16, made its pass at 8:03 a.m. This pass was different from the first in a specific and operationally significant way. The second fighter did not fly past the P-8 on a parallel track. It flew a crossing pattern, approaching from the P-8's right side and crossing ahead of the P-8's nose. At a distance the P-8 crew estimated at 70 feet, lower and slower than the first pass, in a geometry that placed the fighter's exhaust plume directly across the P-8's intended track for approximately 3 seconds. The P-8 flew through the exhaust plume. The vibration was brief and the flight control computers managed it. But the aerodynamic effect of a fighter's exhaust plume at 70 feet and the specific geometry of the crossing was not something that the P-8 structure found comfortable. The mission commander reported this pass with language that had moved from incident report phrasing to something more immediate. At 8:04 a.m., the lid J-16 repositioned to a station that placed it alongside the P-8's left wing, matching the Maritime Patrol aircraft speed and altitude at a distance of approximately 200 feet. Alongside, flying formation with the P-8 in a position that placed the fighter's cockpit in direct visual range of the P-8's cockpit. The J-16 pilot was visible to the P-8 crew. The J-16 pilot was displaying something to the P-8 crew on a card held up in his cockpit window. The P-8's mission commander described what the card showed in his situation report to the Theodore Roosevelt's CIC. The card showed coordinates, a set of geographic coordinates, handwritten, that the mission commander recognized as the coordinates of the nearest Chinese military airfield on Hainan Island. The instruction was clear without a radio transmission. Land there, or continue to be subjected to what was already happening. The admiral received the mission commander's situation report at 8:05 a.m. He transmitted two instructions simultaneously. The first was to the P-8 mission commander. Maintain position, do not comply with the displayed instruction, continue normal operations. The second was to the F/A-18F flight lead, who was 9 minutes out. Your intercept geometry, your timing, your judgment on approach. Both instructions were brief. Both were sufficient for the professionals who received them. The Growler reached the P-8's position at 8:07 a.m. Its arrival changed the geometry of the intercept in the specific way that the presence of an electronic warfare aircraft changes the geometry of any situation involving aircraft that rely on radar and communication systems to coordinate their activity. The Growler did not jam the J-16s. Jamming Chinese military aircraft in international airspace was not within the rules of engagement applicable to this situation. What the Growler did was legal, authorized, and precisely calibrated to produce a specific effect without crossing any line that the rules of engagement defined. The Growler activated its electronic support measures suite and began collecting the J-16's radar and communications emissions with a thoroughness and at a range that the J-16 crew's own electronic support measure systems would immediately detect and characterize. The J-16 crews would know, from the specific signature of the Growler's collection suite at close range, that everything their aircraft were doing and transmitting was being recorded with a precision that would produce a complete technical characterization of their systems. They would know that the collection was happening. They would know that it would continue. This knowledge was the effect. The Growler did not need to do anything else. Its presence and its collection were the message. The lead J-16 reduced the distance it was holding from the P-8's wing from 200 feet to approximately 80 feet at 8:09 a.m. The reduction was the kind of escalation that a professional who has been taught that persistence achieves results applies when the initial approach has not achieved the result. It was also, given the Growler's presence and the F/A-18F's now 4-minute arrival time, the last escalation available before the geometry of the situation would change in ways that placed the J-16s in a position they had not planned for. The F/A-18Fs arrived at 8:12 a.m. The flight lead's approach had been calculated on his way to the intercept, working through the geometry during the transit with the focused efficiency of a pilot who uses the time before an engagement to arrive already prepared. He had a specific picture of what the situation looked like from the E-2D's updates and the P-8's situation reports, and he had decided on his approach before he reached the area. He came in fast from the east, on a course that placed him and his wingman between the J-16s and the P-8, at a geometry that interposed the F/A-18Fs directly into the space the J-16s were occupying relative to the maritime patrol aircraft. He did not approach aggressively. He placed his aircraft at a distance from the lead J-16 that was professional, precise, and smaller than the distance the J-16 had been maintaining from the P-8. The F/A-18F was between the J-16 and the P-8. Its wingman was between the second J-16 and the P-8's egress route. The geometry had been reversed. What had been 2 fighters with a maritime patrol aircraft between them was now 4 aircraft with the P-8 on the outside and the 2 F/A-18Fs between her and the fighters. The flight lead's wingman transmitted on the military emergency frequency in the language that the rules of engagement specified for this category of situation. The transmission was professional, precise, and required no interpretation. It described the current situation, the applicable legal framework, and the behavior that the rules of engagement required. It did not threaten. It stated. The transmission was, in the specific character of the words chosen and the tone in which they were delivered, the voice of a force that was entirely certain of its legal position and entirely prepared to maintain it for as long as the situation required. The lead J-16 held its position for 47 seconds. Then it began to increase the distance between itself and the F/A-18F, not sharply, not abruptly, with the measured, controlled motion of a pilot who is making a decision rather than a pilot who is reacting to a surprise. The second J-16 matched the lead's movement. Both aircraft increased their separation from the F/A-18Fs and the P-8 over a period of 90 seconds, widening the gap from the interposed geometry to a distance that the E-2D's radar picture could no longer classify as a close proximity situation. The J-16s turned north at 8:15 a.m. Their heading pointed back toward Hainan Island. The E-2D tracked them until they were outside the relevant contact area, and then noted in the track record that both contacts had departed the patrol area on a northern heading. The P-8 resumed its standard patrol track at 8:16 a.m. The mission commander reported the resumption to the Theodore Roosevelt's CIC in the format that post-incident reports used. He noted the time, the track, and the condition of the aircraft and crew. The aircraft was undamaged. The crew was operational. The mission commander's report used the word professional at one point to describe the F/A-18F flight lead's approach. The word was accurate. The F/A-18Fs held a position near the P-8's track for 22 minutes after the J-16's departure, maintaining a presence that ensured the maritime patrol aircraft could complete its remaining mission time without a recurrence of what had happened. At 8:37 a.m., with the P-8's planned mission block complete, the mission commander transmitted his departure call and turned the aircraft east toward its base. The F/A-18Fs escorted the P-8 to the eastern edge of the contested patrol area and then returned to the Theodore Roosevelt, recovering aboard at 9:14 a.m. The Growler had continued its collection throughout the F/A-18F escort period. Its electronic support measures, suite recording, everything the J-16s had transmitted during the intercept sequence. The collection product it carried back to the Roosevelt was transmitted to the analysis facility before the crew had finished their post-flight debrief. The J-16s had activated several systems during the intercept, whose emission signatures the collection record would characterize with a precision that the relevant technical programs had been requesting. The intercept had been designed by whoever had ordered it to pressure the P-8 into compliance or departure. It had produced, as a secondary effect, one of the most complete technical characterizations of the J-16's operational systems available in any collection record. The Theodore Roosevelt resumed her standard operating pattern at 9:30 a.m. The E-2D crew that had been on station since before the incident handed off to their relief crew. The P-8 crew filed their incident report in the format and through the channels the reporting architecture required. The incident report would be reviewed, assessed, and integrated into the operational picture that informed how American maritime patrol flights were conducted in this airspace going forward. The rules had not changed. The airspace was still international. The P-8 would fly it again. The next crew that flew it would benefit from the collection the Growler had taken home and from the demonstrated willingness of the force to be present when presence was required. 70 miles of patrol track, 2 J-16 intercepts at less than 100 feet, 1 Growler arrival that changed the geometry without crossing a line. 2 A-18Fs that interposed themselves between a maritime patrol aircraft and the fighters that were pressuring it. 47 seconds from F/A-18F arrival to J-16 departure decision. The airspace remained international. The P-8 completed its mission. The collection came home. What freedom of navigation means in contested airspace is not the absence of pressure. It is the ability to absorb the pressure and continue the mission regardless. The P-8 flew its track. The Growler took the collection. The F/A-18Fs arrived with the geometry that made the continued pressure untenable. Every asset was where the situation required it to be, doing what the situation required it to do, because the force that operates in that airspace has spent the time before the situation ensuring that when the situation requires everything, everything is ready. The South China Sea is international airspace. It remains so because forces like this one insist that it does, every day, on every track, in every weather.